Hi, everybody. It's Monday. It's 1 o'clock, or 1:01. We started a little late today. And this is Pirkei Avot, History and Hashkafa, brought to you by the Tel Aviv International Synagogue under the inspired leadership of Rabbi Ariel Constantine. It is also an auspicious occasion for those of us with those of you with Hasidic leanings, because tonight is the anniversary of Yud Tes Kislev. It's a double holiday for Hasidim. First of all, it's the excuse me, the 19th of Kislev marks the Yortzeit, the anniversary of the passing of the Maggid of Mezrich, who was a leading and perhaps the leading disciple of the Baal Shem Tov. He was the person, I think, more than anybody else, who sort of began to merge classical rabbinic culture with Hasidut, and all of the major strains of Hasidus that exist today are his spiritual descendants. In addition, the leading disciple of the Maggid of Mezrich, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Ladi, who was arrested by the Russian government at the insistence of his Jewish opponents, the Misnagdim, from whom I descend, actually, was freed from a Russian jail in St. Petersburg. You can see it in the fortress of. You can see it in the room that he was held in the fortress of Peter and Paul in St. Petersburg, if you visit. And so Lubavitch, even more than other forms of Hasidus, make this into a very big holiday. Yad Kislev is the major event of the Lubavitch year. And so those of you who celebrate Yud Tes Kislev, either because of the Mezrich or Maggid, or because of the liberation of the, as he is called, the Alter Rebbe, the Rosh Zalman of Ladi, so I wish you a good Yontif. If you're here in Israel tonight, which is when Yad Kislev starts tonight, and for the next few days at Binyanei Haoma, they're having this enormous festival with books about all kinds of books about Hasidut in all kinds of languages, and it's supposed to be an amazing scene. I haven't been there. I understand that today and tomorrow were for men, and Tuesday, Wednesday for women. And please don't get me started about why you need to have separate hours at a book fair. But that's the way they decide to do it. You have to respect their opinions. Okay, let's get down to business. The Mishnah that we you'll see in a minute why I made such a big deal about it being at Kislev. The Mishnah that we were dealing with, what we had started to do was to try to examine the personalities and the teachings and the intellectual personae of the five disciples of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. These were Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanos, Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, Rabbi Yosei HaKohen, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. I missed somebody. Who did I miss? Just a sec. Who did I miss? Oh, Rabbi Shimon ben Asana. So rather than run through the Mishnayot, we're taking them one at a time. So we're still dealing with Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanos, Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanos. We discussed his biography. We talked a little bit about his path from an upper class, not so educated family to becoming one of the leading members of the rabbinic elite, one of the leading leaders of Judaism in the generation after the destruction of the temple. Last week we talked about his statement that one should be concerned and one should be sensitive and one should be involved in the dignity of his friend, of his fellow man, as if just as much as you're self-concerned. And I talked a lot about that. I want to the rest of the Mishnah actually elides into one. Can be elided into one full unit. So I'm going to read the whole thing, and then I see what we have to say about it. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Rabbi Eliezer used to say, we just talked about that. Don't be easy to anger. V'shuv yom echad lefnei mitatcha, and you should do tshuva. One day before you die. And finally, v'heveh mitchamem keneged oran shel chachamim. You should get close to the sages. You should warm yourself with their presence and their wisdom. V'heveh zahir b'gachaltan, and but be careful with the source of their warmth. He calls it the coals, the burning embers, the coals of their presence. Shalot tikaveh. You don't want to be you don't want to be burned. You don't want to be adversely affected by getting too close. Sheneshichatán neshichat shual, because when they bite, it's like being bitten by a fox. I'm going to assume a rabid fox. Akitzatan akitzat akrav, and when they bite at you or when they get you, it's like being hit by a scorpion. Ulechishatán lichishat saraf, and when they hiss, it's like a poisonous snake. B'chol divreihem kegach le'esh, and everything they say is like fiery coals. Well, that's a lot. That's a lot to say. The reason I think all of these go together is because all of the various statements sort of come together can be put together in terms of the way that students and teachers interact. Certainly, you could separate them. You could see each one as each passage, each line is separate significance. But I like to put them all together. I think he's talking about students and teachers, well, it's not just that. I think that what makes me think that is, first of all, there is a tradition to do that, but in addition, it happens to be apropos of Yad Kislev. Just now, I was listening to a what should we call it? A recorded class, a recorded lecture of my teacher, Rabbi Soloveitchik, on the occasion of he was raised in a Lubavitch town called Choslavich, even though he comes from a very, very, very misnagid, anti-Hasidic family, and he was invited to speak at a Yad Kislev, the 19th of Kislev event, so that listening to the recording made me very nostalgic and made me realize that in many ways the dynamic that we experienced in the class of Rav Soloveitchik expresses itself in this Mishnah. So I would like to. So much of what I'm about to say really comes through, or I've come to these conclusions based on my own experiences of the 10 years that I was privileged to sit at Rav Soloveitchik's feet. So let's see how this works out. See how this plays out. Yehi chavod chavercha chaviv alecha kishalach. I think that what Rabbi Eliezer is here saying is that that when you interact, and certainly when people learn together, and that's the traditional Jewish way of studying together, is to study in pairs, there is a tendency for the discussion to become very heated. The rabbis have called this milchamta shel Torah. You read something, you say what you think it means, and your partner says what he thinks it means or she thinks it means, and the search for truth, as I said, can become very, very intense and become very heated, and as a result, sometimes it can get out of hand. I have heard the best friends, really best of friends, who sit and learn together, call each other the worst names, with the absolute worst names, and they don't mean it. They don't mean it. It's like, idiot. Why would you say such a thing? I mean, I remember I sit with when I learned in the base medrash in Har Zion. So I sit opposite from a very dear friend, somebody I've known for easily 45 years, and I came up with something, and which I thought was actually pretty good. And he looked at me and said, "Why would you say something so krum? Krum means like bent. I mean, why would you say something so stupid? And I still think I was right, but he didn't mean anything personally by it. That's how things can become. And I think that the first so that among friends, even among friends, if you're searching for truth, one can lose patience because truth is more important than anything else. Certainly the truth of Torah, because you're trying to approximate whatever it is God is trying to tell you. So I think when the Torah says "Yehi chavod chavercha chaviv alecha keshalach," I think he's saying, listen, you can study with everybody, but yeah, it's very nice, but remember that you're studying with another human being. Remember that you're studying with another person, and don't say things to them that you would not want said to you. I think that's I think it's a good it's certainly good it's good advice under all circumstances, but I think in the context of traditional learning, it has an extra sort of valence to it. Ve'al tehi noach lichos. Don't be quick to get angry. Similarly, if you have to have patience with other people, don't get angry quickly. First of all, it is certainly possible that what the other person has said is what the other person has said is valid. Maybe you just didn't understand it. Sometimes when you're studying Torah, you get so caught up in what you think it means that you can't absorb anybody else's opinion. You can't even really get to what they were saying, and then you can lose your temper, and that can first of all be hurtful to the other person, and it can certainly prevent you from growing because you get so caught up in what you have to say. There is a famous story. It happened a number of times, but there is a famous story of Rabbi Soloveitchik that he had developed a certain approach to a passage in the Talmud. And one of the younger students, one of the newer students, I wasn't there, this was before my time, one of the younger students suggested something to the Rav, and he couldn't hear it. I mean, literally, his ears were okay, but he was not so caught up in his own approach at the time that he couldn't understand, or he couldn't appreciate what the person had said, and he lost his temper. He yelled at him, and the Rav was a holy terror sometimes. Less in my time than in the 40s and 50s and 60s. I studied with him in the 70s and early 80s. I was with him from 1973 to 1982. And he said no, and the poor kid, turned, I can imagine, turned blue or white or green or whatever it was. After the shiur, when all the kids went out, the Rav sat there thinking, and it was at that point that he thought about what the kid had said, and he realized that he'd been right and that the Rav had been wrong. So the Rav actually went to find this student and apologized and said, "You were right, I was wrong, and tomorrow we're going to look at the Gemara your way." So al tehi noach lichos, don't be dismissive, and don't be totally dismissive of somebody else's opinion right away. However, the implication that's at the same time, that's on the one hand. On the other hand, the implication of the passage is that there is room for what should we call it? There is room for fear, or there is room for getting angry in an educational context. Now, that certainly is not the way we run classes. That's certainly not the way that we teach today. But it can work. We in the Rav Shir, in those of us study with Rav Soloveitchik, who expected from everybody else the same degree of effort and sometimes the same degree of success as he had, which may be a little bit unrealistic, because Rav Soloveitchik was one of the greatest minds Jewish people have produced in the past, certainly number of centuries. Even Haredi, the Haredi world was not really happy with him because he was a Zionist, because he had a doctorate and so on. But none other than the Punovich Rav, who founded the Punovich Yeshiva, was Rav Kahaneman, said that the Rav was the greatest Rosh Yeshiva of the 20th century. So that so why he thought we would be as smart as he was is a question. But he did expect everyone to put in 100% effort, and I think that is not unrealistic. And we were always afraid of making the grade, even if we tried, because he had very demanding standards, very high standards, and did not suffer. He didn't suffer fools lightly. He didn't suffer fools at all. So the fear of his anger, or of his rebuke, actually, fear of his rebuke can actually be a motivating factor for proper study, for success in one's studies. So I think Al Hinoach Lechos, he's not the Rebbe Elazar ben Horkonos is not totally denying the validity of anger as whether faux anger or real anger, as a factor or as a motivating factor. So that way, in the study of Torah, that if that's the case, if what I'm saying is true, I think it actually is true. Of course, it has to pay. It all depends on the student. It depends on the context, but still, there's a famous. I think what will help us to resolve give a possible resolution to a place where Maimonides contradicts himself. Maimonides sometimes contradicts himself, and that's one of the great moments when Lithuanian scholars like to sit there and display their talents at original interpretations. I'm not presenting anything so earth-shattering, but Maimonides does contradict himself blatantly in the first and second chapters of his article, of his what's called Hilchot Deot. Let's call it the rules of moral qualities, which is the second section of the Mishnah Torah. Mishnah is divided in 14 books, and each book is divided into halachot, which is separate sections. So first comes Hilchot Yisodei Torah, the laws of the foundations of the Torah, and then comes the laws of moral qualities, Hilchot Deot. So Rambam in the first chapter of Hilchot Deot lays down the rule of the golden mean, which he clearly, took from the Nicomachean Ethics of Aristotle. That ethics are determined by the golden mean. The extremes are to be avoided at all cost, and he explicitly says that you shouldn't be too light. You shouldn't be too quick to get angry, but you shouldn't be ataxic either. You shouldn't, in other words, be totally apathetic. That's also no good. You get angry when you're supposed to, and not angry when you're not supposed to. That's chapter 1. In chapter 2, Maimonides says that anger is the absolute worst thing in the world. There's a Gemara in Shabbos like that, which says that person who gets angry, it's as if they're worshiping idols. I mean, it's the worst thing you could possibly do. The Rambam says you should avoid anger like nobody's business. You should just go out of your way, never, never, never to get angry. So that's... And all the commentaries, you don't have to tell you, sit there and try to figure out how to resolve this. I'm not going to try to recreate or even take the time right now to go through all of the possible resolutions of this discussion, of the various attempts to resolve this contradiction or apparent contradiction. Because Maimonides did nothing. I mean, if a book was ever planned out, it was the Mishnah Torah. So the Rambam stuck that right in there to get people thinking. That's clear. One thing you can take away from this contradiction is that under certain circumstances, apparently, there must be two types of anger. And one type of anger is absolutely deplorable. Sometimes anger, in fact, the kind I think he's talking about in chapter 2, is if you're getting angry because you're just all cut up with yourself. Anger is one of the things about Avodah Zarah and why I think our society is fundamentally idolatrous, is because we worship ourselves. Anger, as a friend of mine who's a therapist said, is not an emotion. Anger is an activity. Anger is something you do when you're only concerned with yourself, and you don't really give a damn about anybody else around you. So you just act out, and you lash out. Depression, on the other hand, is when you don't care about yourself and you put the anger in. In any case, so that's a negative kind of anger. The positive kind of anger could be one where, in fact, it's used in alti noach lichos. You use it, or you use the threat of anger, or the anticipation of anger, or expressing your displeasure to your students as a motivating factor, which will, if the students are so inclined, or students are are sensitive, to motivate them to try to push themselves beyond anything, beyond their comfort zones. So I think that's what we're talking about over here. Alti noach lechos. We start off talking about the student, and then he says, Alti noach lechos. Don't be quick to be angry, either to your fellow student. Don't yell and scream at them if you don't like what they say, and if you're a teacher. But the idea that you will have a sharp retort, or that you will express your disappointment. Rabbi Soloveitchik used to do this. He used to complain. He said, this I remember myself. You guys, you prepare an hour or two, or even, do you prepare enough? He said, I'm up all night long, and this is true. He really was. I was up. I'm up for hours and hours and hours preparing this lecture, preparing this shiur, and you guys don't even put in the same amount of time. Let's get real here. So I think that's what Rebbe Lezer is saying. I think that's how he resolved the one way of looking at the Rambam, that anger, when it's channeled and when it's measured, and even when it's put on, but people don't know that, can be a positive educational tool in certain contexts. No, what's next? V'shuv yom echad lifnei motcha. Now, obviously, this is something of a tautology, because what do you mean shuv yom echad lifnei motcha? Repent one day before you die. Nobody knows when they're going to die. Nobody knows. It might be 5 minutes from now. I mean, Nebuch, we had a horrible terrorist attack yesterday here in Israel, where a young man, L.E.K., was walking to the Kotel to daven in the morning to catch last minyan, and he thought that he was just going to go daven. But as he was walking to the Kotel, an Arab murderer a terrorist pulled out an automatic weapon and murdered him, and wounded 4 other people and three other civilians and two policemen. You don't know. I mean, you don't know. We don't know. And those of us, if we've learned anything in the time of Corona, it is certainly the fragility of life. As we get older, that also becomes an issue. Not just because we come closer to the end and we unfortunately lose people. It's because time. We begin to look at time a lot differently. We don't feel like our time is open-ended. So what does it mean? Shuv yom echad lifnei motcha. To repent one day before you die. So the answer is, you have to be aware of one should always think of the maximum way of using time, and what one wants to achieve, and how one wants to improve, and try to make the maximum effort as if this were our last day on earth, because it might be. Now, that's not meant to be morbid, that's meant to be motivating. Just like the anger is meant to be motivating, so the anticipation or the awareness of the fragility of life is meant to be a motivating factor. Please God, it won't be tomorrow, it won't be the next day, it won't be the day after that. But at least you can, at the end of the day, you can say, I did the actual maximum that I could do today in terms of learning, in terms of my moral growth, in terms of tzedakah, in terms of tefillah, in terms of providing for my family, and whatever the case, whatever the positive things you're doing are, then you should maximize. Then at least you know that you did the best you possibly could. This thing about the awareness of the use of time is something which I find personally, because my birthday this week, is something which bears on me, and I think that's the lesson to be had. In the present context, Shuv yom echad lifnei motcha, if you hurt somebody today, maybe you won't get a chance to make up to them. And if you want to learn X, Y, and Z, maybe you won't get there. try to be able to make sure that you do your business well, so there's no carryover of the negative stuff. And finally, you know what? I see that it's 1:26. The last one is going to be a little bit. All of this mixed comments about rabbis is going to be it's going to take me a while, so I think we will close it there. What I will do is I will link as soon as it's finished. I will link Rabbi Soloveitchik's talk about Lubavitch and Hasidim and Misnagdim, Lubavitch and the world from which he came. I'll try to link it into the Facebook, I put on my Facebook page and on my YouTube channel, but I'll also put it on the Tel Aviv International Synagogue site Facebook page, so you can see it. It should be pretty clear. I hope you enjoy it. As always, please feel free to share this video, and questions are always welcome, either in the comments or by direct message, or however you can get in touch with me. And we will see you next time.